So I want to start with a question. So why do we use Umbraco? Why do we choose to use Umbraco to build our custom solutions? So I'd love to ask you all, but I haven't got time. So thankfully, I did ask people on Twitter and on Slack to give me some keywords as to what they think of when you're choosing Umbraco. So these are what people said. By far, like the biggest ones that kind of sprung out are things like friendly, flexible, extensible. And from a content editing perspective, absolutely. With the doc type editor, things are just like so easy for defining your content models, creating blueprint of what your content needs to look like. And then we've got a whole suite of different property editors that we can make use of to edit that content. And then obviously Umbraco takes all of that and does loads of magic, gives us list views, ways to manage and structure all of that content. So again, from content perspective, fantastic. But what about when you get to integration? So I think the first reasonable question everybody would ask themselves is, can I reuse Umbraco? So what people end up doing, I'm sure everybody's had like repository nodes in the root of their content section. And that's great for like quite simple integrations, if it's just collections of data or content. So yeah, so if we get to some more complicated scenarios, so user-generated content is not great for, you don't want to use content for that. We've got whole pipelines that go along with content, so it's just not suitable for user-generated content. You've also got scenarios like bulk content management, so you've got a lot of data, maybe you've got a lot of data that you want to manage in one go. External stuff, so maybe there's content in third-party APIs that you want to be able to present and manage within Umbraco. Or you've got some applications for your client that you want to be able to use within Umbraco. It would just work so much better if it was sat next to the tools that they're used to using already. Or maybe there's just some existing feature within the CMS that is just not quite there. It's like 99% there, but you just wish you could change it or tweak it a little bit or add more to it just to make it fit your scenario much better. For those types of scenarios, you could just feel like the ground has kind of gone from underneath your feet. Everything that you know about content modeling and editing doesn't necessarily apply when it comes to integrations. Really, when we're dealing with content, we're thinking from a document types, list views, property editors. So we've built up this domain knowledge from the content editing side. But when it comes to integrations, a lot of that just doesn't apply. You start to have to deal with sections and trees and views and services, and they're not things you've had to think about in the other areas. But equally, there just doesn't seem to be any middle ground. It's one or the other, and there's no, you can't reuse that knowledge that you've built up over the years. So what is the solution? So Umbraco would suggest ultimately that, well, the only option is to go bespoke, and going bespoke just means learning a hell of a lot of stuff. So you need to know a bit about UI, UX. You want to make whatever you're going to build look good. There's lots of APIs that you're just going to have to learn, like inside and out. So like sections, trees, menus, permissions. Then you've got persistence. You need to save all this content. You're going to have to persist that into a database somewhere. Then you've got to start dealing with the front end. So Angular, JavaScript, API controllers to be able to communicate between the two. So there's just a massive amount of knowledge that you've got to build up. It's just specific to doing integration work. In terms of the resources that are available to do all of that, there are 2 training courses that are kind of to do with back office integrations. So they're going to cost you north of £1,000 per session. And they're good introductions, but they're not necessarily going to be exactly what you want for your integration. So you've still got stuff you've got to learn on top of that. So then you're going through the documentation, trying to find what you need for your particular scenario. Again, it's just hunting that down and trying to find what's relevant to your needs. Or the last resort is usually just poking through the Umbraco source code and trying to figure out how Umbraco have done it. And that's usually how I end up figuring out how to do most of my work. It's just look what other people have done and replicate and tweak it. So then the question is there another way? And well, I wouldn't be here if there wasn't. So yes, the alternative is Konstrukt. So this is what I'm here to talk to you about today, and hopefully show you how you can save lots of time and lots of money by using it. So yeah, my name's Matt Brailsford. I run a company called Outfield Digital. We solely do package development. So our two main products are Vendor, the e-commerce solution for Umbraco, and Konstrukt, which is our dynamic admin UI builder tool. And as I say, that's what I'm talking about today. So what is Konstrukt? Well, Konstrukt essentially bridges the gap. It takes a lot of concepts that you're familiar with, so tries to reuse a lot of Umbraco features and acts as an interpreter to the integration side of things. So you don't necessarily need to know as much on the integration side. What this means is all of that stuff you had to learn, you no longer have to. So I can just cross them all out. And then it basically simplifies those into two core concepts. So one is some back office concepts. So this isn't knowing them inside and out, it's just knowing what they are and how they apply and where they apply within the back office. But the rest of it is one unified, developer-friendly C# API. So it's all based around the C# Fluent API on how you manage Konstrukt. So ultimately, what it can do is take something that looks like this and make it look like this. So it can generate all this UI by that config, and it's kind of linked to your models and your content and your data, and I'll explain how it does all of that. So there is quite a lot of code slides throughout this presentation. You don't need to know about code. The primary thing to take away from this is when you see those things is just look at the little amount of code or the little amount of effort that is required to have such a big and powerful outcome to that amount of code. So that's all you need to think about, really. So the fundamental concept in Konstrukt, or like what is central to pretty much everything else, is this thing of collections. So a collection is going to be some kind of data model. So 99 times out of 100, that's going to be some database table. So you've got some content in a database table and you want to be able to manage that. It doesn't have to be a database table. It's pluggable, so you can swap that out. But like I said, the most common scenario is going to be that of a database table. Then we need to get that into C#, so we need a way of being able to communicate with that. So the way that comes with Umbraco at the moment, so the way that we use, is to use Umbraco. So we get that into Umbraco and we can deal with it as C# objects then. And then we use Konstrukt to act as a mapper between that model and our UI. So you can kind of think of it as the same as the doctype editor. So you're building up a blueprint, but we're doing it via code and the Fluent API rather than using the editor to do it for us. So what we can do within that collection configuration is quite a lot. So we can configure a few settings. We can manage the list view, so we can set columns, what we want to display in the columns, how we want to display it, what the headings are for those. We've got full control over the editor, so we can control setting up tabs, the layout, having field sets and what fields we actually want to modify and what property editors we use for those, so we can reuse content, reuse Umbraco concepts. We can perform actions, so if there's tasks that we need to perform on our data, we can do that. We can build actions to do that. We've got filtering to be able to do free text and more advanced searching against our data. Cards for key metrics, simplified displays. We've got permissions, and then we've got child collections. So if you've got collections that are linked to an existing collection, we can represent that kind of hierarchy in that regard. And I'll show you how we do all of this. So to start with, you're going to have some kind of data model. So we'll set up a database table. So here, this is just like really simplistic example. We'll create a database table. We'll run this. This will create a database table in our database. We'll create a model. So this is using some Umbraco. We're using some Umbraco attributes just to kind of map that model to our database model. And then when we get to Konstrukt, we start to configure it using this API. So this is kind of specific to collections. There is a little bit that goes around this, and we'll get to that later on, but I think the collections is the most important one to start with. So within a Konstrukt config, we can call add collection. We use generic, so here we're passing in the type of that model that we've just defined that can communicate with the database. And then we have some configuration. So we use lambdas a lot, so lambdas are this funny syntax if you're not familiar, but this ultimately lets us be strongly typed. So it'll do IntelliSense, it'll tell you what properties are available. But this config is basically saying, okay, what is the primary ID of this model so that we know what to communicate with. And then we've got some settings for like labels that are going to appear on buttons and displayed in menus and things like that. And then it's within this collection config that we do the rest of the configuration. So the first thing that we want to be able to do is we've got a database somewhere or some content somewhere, and we're going to want to pull that back, display it in a list view. So the types of things that we can do with Konstrukt in list views, we've got things called data views, which are pre-selectable kind of views of our data. You can define what those views are. We've got free text searching. We've got advanced searching, so a dialogue, and you can do more what you like, choosing checkboxes and those types of things. We've got multiple different types of actions that we can perform, like menu actions, bulk actions, and row actions. We can choose what columns to display and how to display the values, and when to display them based upon permissions, and the pagination as well, so how many results get displayed at any one time. There is some configuration that we'll get to that's external to the list view, but for the list view itself, this is the configuration. So in our collection config, we call list view. Inside that, we add which fields we want to add to it. And that's an add field method using a Lambda expression that points to a property on our POCO model. And Konstrukt just knows how to map that then to queries and all the other things that need to happen in able to populate a list view. So from that, we end up with something like this. And the important thing to know here is that that's from database to view. Like that configuration now communicates to the database, pulls entities back, renders them in a list view, and we've got all of that automatically just by doing that configuration. So the next thing, once we've got that into a list view, we're going to want to be able to start editing that content. So from our editor, we can do all sorts of things. We can design the whole layout. We can use tabs. We can use field sets to organize our UI, very similar to how you could with the doc type editor. We can use data types. We can actually use the property editors that come with Umbraco to edit the data. So if you've got like specific user interface for a specific type of data, you can reuse that rather than having to build from scratch. We can do validation. We can have permissions at very fine-grained levels, so we can hide full tabs, complete tabs, or field sets or individual properties based on whether the content is being created or edited, or based on the user roles as well. So you can say who can see what, when. We can perform different types of actions in the menu. So that actions menu in the top right within Umbraco, we reuse that area. And we've also got save actions, which is like the save and publish button in content. And then we've got a sidebar. So if you've ever been into the users section, and there's metadata down the right-hand side of like the user's email, avatar, that thing, those types of things, we can set that up as well using Konstrukt. So if you've got metadata for your models, we can represent that in a sidebar. So how this looks from a configuration perspective, we call editor to say we're going to start configuring our editor. Then we call add tab, giving the tab a name. We call add field set, giving the field set a name. And then inside there, we call add field for as many fields as we want to display in that field set. We can go further by changing labels. We can set the specific data type that we want to use. So that's by name or ID, like the data type that is defined within Umbraco's data type section. And we can also define regular expressions for validation to ensure that we're only persisting values that we want to put into our database. And Konstrukt generates this. So again, you'd be pretty hard pushed to tell whether that's Umbraco or something custom, but all of that has been generated, and that again, that's linked database to front end, so that can pull entities back. You can edit them using all the property editors that come with Umbraco, and you can click save, and that'll get persisted back to your database. And all you've done is about 15 lines of code to define that editor, and Konstrukt has generated all the rest for you. So now that we can list and we can edit content, you're probably going to want to be able to do more control, be able to work with that data, or filter it and find specific items that you're going to want to work on. So there's multiple things that Konstrukt can do. So from searching, we've got free text search, so a little search box that appears at the top of the list view. From a filtering perspective, we've got global filters, which allows us to apply a where clause that applies to any query for a given collection config. And then we've got data views, which is predefined, user selectable, filtered views of our data. And we've got filterable properties, so we can do more fine-grained advanced filtering. So these are the syntaxes for all those various things. So for add searchable property, we simply have a lambda statement that points to a property on our model. That's got to be a string-based property, but Konstrukt knows then make that field searchable and will automatically append that to their search queries. For filtering, so a global filter, like I say, applies to every query that is performed within that collection config. Again, it uses a lambda statement, but this is an expression. So here we're saying where the status equals pending. So every query for that collection will only ever work for return pending items. But Konstrukt converts that expression into an actual SQL statement. For data views, it's very similar, but these are named. So we can have pending, approved, rejected. And again, you provide a lambda statement for the specific query that's going to apply to that. These will get rendered in a drop-down list, which I'll show you in a moment. And for advanced filterable properties, very similar to searchable, we just point to a property, and Konstrukt does very clever stuff in terms of it'll try and choose the right data like editor for that particular property. So strings become free text searches, date fields become from to date range inputs, and enums become drop-down lists. But again, you've got full control over that. So if there are specific options for a value, you can define those as well. So how that works is along these lines. So here we've got a drop-down list. So these are data views. So you can see you've got pre-selectable filters of your data. We've got, that's slow. So yeah, you choose from the data views list. We've got free text search up here. So any text-based search will search against any searchable properties. And then we've got the advanced filter. So all of this got generated based upon which properties you said were filterable. So it automatically builds that for you. So next up, we might want to perform tasks on that data. So this is what actions are for. The types of actions that we can perform with Konstrukt are menu actions. So this is the actions menu that appears in the top right-hand corner of all of Umbraco's UI. We've got bulk actions and row actions for list views, and we've got save actions that are specific to the editor UI. So because actions are a little bit more complex, you can't do them statically within like the Fluent config. So this we do need to move out to a class-based setup, but it should be pretty simple. We've got a base class that you need to implement, fill in some metadata, which is the icon, the name, the color, alias, and those types of things. And then we've got a single method called execute that you need to implement. This is past the collection alias and an array of entity IDs. So if it's a bulk action, you get a list of all the IDs of the entities that were within that bulk selection. If it's a single row action, then it's just a single ID of that specific entity. But you've got this method, you can do whatever you want in that method. You can use dependency injection in there as well, so if you need to access other services to perform that operation, you can do so. So once you've defined your action, we attach that to our collection. We call add action, passing in the generic type of that action that we've just created. And then actions are just actions until you define where they are displayed. So we do that using set visibility. Here we just control what is the action type, so we can say it's a bulk action and it's a row action, and that will automatically then display that action in those two areas. So again, what this looks like, essentially you can do a bulk action, click on export, that is an action that's then generating a CSV and returning that for download. Similar, even the inbuilt actions for Konstrukt itself, so all the delete operations and those types of things, they're also defined as actions, so you can define actions in very much the same way and put them in the same areas. If you want to go a bit more advanced and you need some user input before you can perform your particular action, we can handle that as well. So you can create a simple POCO model to capture the settings, and then when you implement your action, you can implement a base class that accepts a settings model, and then you get an extra method that you set up, which is a configure method, and this is then inside that got another Fluent API config, very basically the same as the editor config, so you can lay out the field sets, the fields of the properties that you want to be able to capture for your settings. And then within our execute method, we get a settings model passed into that method as well. So again, Konstrukt is going to use this config, generate the UI, capture the settings, create that model, and pass it to your execute method. So that it's all predefined and set up for you. So what this looks like, from bulk actions, here we can do a change status, for example. This opens a dialog instead of performing the action straight away. That UI was generated based upon your configuration. So you lay out the properties that you want to capture. Konstrukt captures that data, maps it to that settings model, and passes it to your execute method for you to handle. So cards. Cards are essentially little visual key metrics indicators that appear above the list view. I'll show you in a second. But there are two types of cards. Really simple cards, which we call count cards. So on your collection config, you can call add card, give it a name, give it an icon, give it a lambda statement, which is a lambda expression, which is a where clause, and Konstrukt will perform a count on items that match that where clause, and that'll just get displayed as a number in a little card that appears against your list view. If you want to do more advanced ones, very similar to how the actions worked, you can create a card as a class, give it some metadata, and then you get a get value method in there. You can perform as complicated an operation as you want to get a specific value. And then to assign that to your collection, you call add card, passing in the generic type. And what you get is these little things above your list view. So just handy for key metrics. So if you've got like information that you just want to be able to see at an instant, you can add those and appear above your list view. So the last more complicated one is probably, well, not complicated, but feature is child collections. And child collections are on our collection. We can call add child collection, passing in a type for another model, say what the ID field is, but then what is the foreign key or the parent ID key? How do they map together? And then inside that, you've got exactly all the same things again. So you can design the list view, the editor, and everything for that child collection. And how that looks when you've got an entity that's got a child collection, you get a content app in the top right. On there, you get the list view for that child collection, and the editor for each one of those appears as an infinite editor. And you can go deeper, so you should be able to have child collections in child collections if you need to do that. There are some advanced things that I'm not going to go into because I haven't got time to go through them all, but I'll just outline them. So we can do custom repositories. So as I say, we work with Umbraco, but you can swap that out. There's an interface to do that. So if you want to use Entity Framework, or even if you want to connect to like third-party APIs, you can implement a repository class that just asks you to fill in get methods, save methods, update methods. So you implement those and tell Konstrukt to use that repository, and it'll automatically work with that different data source. We've got encrypted properties, which is very simple. You say this is an encrypted property, and Konstrukt will automatically encrypt and decrypt that property as it saves and returns it from the database. Value mappers, because we're using property editors for the individual fields on our model, maybe the returning value from that property editor isn't what you want in the database, so you can design value mappers which act as a middle thing that will do a conversion when it gets it from the database and before it sends it to the model, so you can control converting that into something that you actually want to persist. And then permissions, how you saw the set visibility for the cards, you get that in a lot of areas. So field sets, tabs, properties, you can set visibility and use roles or the editor state, whether it's create or edit, to set whether stuff should be displayed. And it all uses that same set visibility method. So now that we've got collections, so that's how you would define a collection. You now need to be able to define where you want to inject that somewhere in the UI. And for this, we've got different areas that you can do that. So we can either do sections, or we can do dashboards, we can do content apps, and we can do what we call virtual subtrees. So to add a section, in the root of our Konstrukt config, we call add section, giving the section a name. Konstrukt sections only have one tree, so we just call .tree, and inside that is where you would do add collection. So for however many collections you want to add to that section, you just add them to this tree config. What Konstrukt generates is this. In the top menu, it'll create a section for that one that you just defined. It'll create a tree on the left-hand side, and for every collection you defined, it gets added as a node, and everything opens in the right-hand side. Again, looking pretty much exactly like Umbraco looks like. To add a dashboard, these are contextual, so you need to set what is the context. So for that, we call with section. So what section do we want to add this dashboard to? give it a section alias, then we call add dashboard, and on that dashboard we then add the collection again. And so what this looks like is we get, say for example you're in content, it generates a dashboard, and we can have our collection displayed on there. For context outs, very similar. It's contextual to a section and a tree, so we call with section with tree, passing in the alias. We call add context app, we add our collection to that context app, and we instantly have a context app appear in that particular section. So here we've added a collection to every document type of a specific type, so you can display a list, our collection next to that. And the more interesting one is one called virtual subtree, which allows us to inject a tree into an existing tree. So this is quite useful for extending existing features in kind of a seamless way. So again, contextual, with section, with tree, add virtual subtree. We add our collection, and then we get along these lines. So this tree is not something we are in control of, so this is coming from vendor. But the notifications node is injected, so that is Konstrukt. So this opens out on the right-hand side, looks like it's part of that system, even though it's not. So those are like your key areas. So I'll just quickly run through a couple of 3 examples, the video, so you don't have to watch me poke around the keyboard. But our key example is one of comments. So it's predominantly what has been on the slides. We've got source code for this, so you can actually have access to this and see how it's all done. But what we've set up is a really simple blog example. On there, you can go to a blog post and you can write a comment. So this actually uses the Konstrukt's API to persist that data as well. So there is the ability to actually request for Konstrukt's repository, and you can use that to do simple persistence. But inside the back office, we've got 3 main examples. So one is a dashboard, which is this. So this is for pending comments. So that's got a global filter, which is only showing pending comments for the whole system. From there, we can do bulk operations. So if you just want to be able to quickly change the status of those comments, approve them, reject them, you can do that site-wide. Then we've got content app, which allows you to see the comments specific to the blog posts that were written against. So again, just being quite contextual. And then the third example is the full-blown repository. So in there, it's like the full-on management interface, giving you all the data views, the metrics, the filters, and all. Just a thorough example of how you would write a more advanced management interface around that. So this is a good example of like user-generated content management, so that you wouldn't usually want to put in content, but Konstrukt's a really good use case for that. So this is just showcasing the ability to have custom section, custom tree, dashboards, content apps, cards, actions, filtering. So they're all the features that we're using in there. Next, maybe you've got an e-commerce site and you want the feature whereby if something goes out of stock, you want to be able to like capture an email address and notify them once it's back in stock. So here we could capture the email. We can then use a virtual subtree to inject that node into vendor, and then we can so we've got a virtual subtree. In here, we've got a collection of those different submissions. We can do custom actions then to send like a notification email. So we can reuse vendors' email templating to send out a notification. Again, all using Konstrukt to do that. So that's a really good example of CMS extension. So how we've taken vendor that doesn't have that feature, but we've built it to make it look like it does. And from a client's perspective, they wouldn't know the difference. But we've managed to inject that node. We're using virtual subtrees. We've got actions and filtering to kind of set up all of that example. And then the last quick example is like if you've got bulk management. So maybe you've just got like a massive list of data that you need to look after. Your client just wants to look after that with CSV file, doesn't really want to be able to manage that, but you want to be able to access that, see that data, and maybe use it in other areas in your system. So here we could just create a simple action that accepts a CSV file. You write the action to import that. We do actually have that one out of the box anyway, but you can pull the data and just dump it straight over the top of everything that was already in that data source. So that's a good example of bulk data management. Again, something that you might not be able to do, like just using default Umbraco features. We're doing custom sections and trees and actions and filtering in that particular one. So we're nearly there. So pricing wise, So for Konstrukt, if you've only got one editable collection, then it's free. So one collection configuration that's got editable features. You can have read-only views setups, collection setups. If you just want to display the data for your clients to be able to see, you can do that without. That doesn't count towards your free collection. Beyond that, it's £450 for a single solution, which is essentially one instance, one install. Or after that, we've got £1,250 for more of an agency license, which is 12 months. Within that 12 months period, you can install it on as many solutions as you wish. So in conclusion, it ultimately boils down to 6 days. If Konstrukt can save you 6 days, you're into multiples of thousands of savings based upon an average developer day rate. So it's up to you what that means. That could be passed on as a saving to your customer. So maybe you can take on projects that you wouldn't necessarily been able to take on before if it was going to be too much work previously. Or maybe it just means that you're freeing up more resource to be able to work on more projects. If you don't need the 3 different, like a UI designer, a front-end developer, and a back-end developer to build like a whole custom bespoke implementation, then they can be working on other things and just making you more profitable that way. But even if it can't save you 6 days, if it only saves you 1.5 days, you've made the license fee back. And if you can do in 1.5 days what Konstrukt can do, then you really don't need Konstrukt. But yeah, so just a few resources. So go to Get Konstrukt if you want to find out more. Docs are all on there. Pretty much, literally everything is documented in Konstrukt. It's the most thorough one I've ever done. The demo is on GitHub, so the comments one is on there, but I'll make sure the other 2 are on there as well. And you can find us on Twitter an hour if you've got any questions. Or I'm here as well. But other than that, that's it. Thank you.